In the previous lecture, we had a detailed introduction about useReducer hooks. So, in this lecture, we are going to proceed with the practical example. We are going to demonstrate this example by implementing a simple counter application. So, we will be able to increment the counter value, decrement, and even reset the counter value to 0. Though the application might appear simple, but again, it exhibits the pattern that you will see in your everyday coding. Quickly within the components directory, let's create a new package called useReducer practice. Within this package, let's create a new component called myCounter1. Generate the functional component. Right within the GSS, go ahead to create 3 different buttons. So right within the div, we're going to have a button, the increment, and I'm going to duplicate it twice. And this is going to be decrement, and this is going to be reset button. So the next in line is to create the counter that will be displayed in the GSS. So for that, we need the useReducer hook. To implement the useReducer hook, first, we have to import it at the top level. So here I'm going to do useReducer. Having done that, just like other hooks that we studied in the previous lecture, the useReducer hook is also a function. We have to invoke it. So right within the component, we are going to invoke the useReducer hook. Let's quickly have a resense of the syntax. Previously, we learnt that the useReducer hook accepts 2 arguments. The first argument is a reducer method, and the second argument is the initial state. So right within the parameter, we are going to have the reducer method, comma, and then the initial state. Having done this, the next in line is to declare the initial state and define the reducer function. So go outside the component, right at the top, we are going to have const initial state equal 0. Let's quickly define the reducer function. Const reducer, set it to R function. So the reducer function accepts 2 parameters. First is the current state, and the second parameter is the action. So we're going to have the current state, comma, the action. And so the reducer function also returns a value which is the new state. And here for teaching purpose, I'm going to do return new state like this. Don't worry, we are going to see how it goes in the future. For the transaction to take place, we have to trigger the second parameter in the reducer function, which is the action. So you can think of the action as an instruction that is given to the reducer function. And based on the specification of the action, the reducer will perform the necessary state transition. So for this example, we are going to have 3 different actions: the increment, decrement, and the reset action. So let's quickly wipe this off. In the case of reducer, the common practice to implement code based on its action is to use the switch case. So here we are going to do switch. The switch expression is going to be action. Following the requirements of our application, the action here is going to be increment, decrement, and the reset action. So here we're going to have the first case to be increment, column, and we are going to return the current state plus 1. It's as simple as that. And here, I just have to duplicate this, duplicate it twice, and here we're going to have the decrement. The new state is going to subtract 1 from the initial state. And here we are going to have case reset, which is to reset the state to value 0. And that is the initial state. So this is going to return the initial state. And lastly, we have to specify the default case. In this case, we are going to return the state itself. It's as simple as that. Now, the next in line is to dispatch the action. Similarly to the useState hooks, useReducer returns a pair of value which we can grab using the array destructuring syntax. Here I'm going to do const right within, and here we are going to have the dispatch method, and then assign it like this. The useReducer returns the current state, which in this case we called it count, alongside with the dispatch method. And the dispatch method is used to execute a code corresponding to a particular action. So, the count over here is a variable that is used to store the initial state. So quickly write within the GSS, we will use the head1 tag to display the count. Now we're going to do head1, right within, we have to display the count, which is this guy right here that is used to hold the initial state and as well the state that will be updated. This is just used to hold the state, okay? And this guy over here is used to dispatch the code based on its action. You are going to see that in the jiffy. So right within the button, we have to specify the onClick. And within the onClick, we are going to take in an arrow function that will be used to invoke the dispatch method. And the dispatch method is going to be used to execute a code based on its action. And in this case, we have action increment. It's as simple as that. So now I'm going to copy this. See the way I copied it, right from the opening curly bracket to the onClick. Copy, come here and paste. So we just have to change this to decrement because we want to dispatch the decrement action. So come here like this and paste it as well. In this case, we want to dispatch the reset action. So when we dispatch the increment action, it is going to add 1 to the initial count value. When we dispatch the decrement action, it will subtract 1 from the initial count value. And lastly, when we dispatch the reset action, it will reset the count to 0, which is the initial state. Let's quickly render it in the app component. Come to the top and then we have to import my counter1 from component / useReducer practice / my counter1. And when you scroll down, we just have to render my counter1. Close it up with the self-closing tag, save, and please make sure to run the application on the terminal. Let me show you. Can you see? My application is currently running. And on the browser, there it is. Can you see that? Let's give it a try by clicking on the buttons. I click on the increment button. It increments to 1. I click on decrement. It decrements to 0. And again, I hit on the increment. And then let me try reset this time. Beautiful. Everything is working perfectly fine as expected. So, to recap, go back to VS Code and let me show you quickly. To make use of the useReducer, first, you have to import it at the top. And then, the useReducer is a function. Therefore, you have to invoke it. And as well, this function takes in 2 parameters. First is the reducer method, and second is the initial state. Yeah? And also, the useReducer hook returns an array of two values, which in this case, the initial state and a dispatch method. The dispatch method is used to dispatch the action. And the variable count over here is used to store the value of the state. Okay, so when you go to the top where we have the reducer function, this guy over here, which is the first parameter in the useReducer hook. So here, the reducer function takes in two parameters. First is the state and then the action. So in the case of a reducer, the convention to implement code based on its action is to use the switch case. And that is why we have the switch over here. And right here in the switch, we implemented the actions. Okay, so we have case increment. This will return a new state that will add 1 to the initial state. And of course, you should know that the initial state is also the second parameter right within the useReducer function. And here is it. Okay, so when the action is increment, it is going to add 1 to the initial state. And when the action is decrement, we are also subtracting 1 from the initial state. And then when the action is reset, we reset the value to 0. And here we have the default state of the application. Right within the JSS, we implemented an onClick to call the dispatch method. So right within the dispatch method, we specified the action. This is all for now, and in the next lecture, we will take more complex example. See you in the next lecture. Stay focused and always take care.